Well, we spoke earlier about Labor's demonisation of Israel, and now have a listen to these comments by former Foreign Minister Bob Carr.
There's a pattern of behaviour here that really demands comparison with the worst of the last 100 years of Stalin's Ukraine, of the Warsaw Ghetto, of Mao's Great Leap Forward. Families who have now gone for 5 days without a crumb of food. And the point is that the IDF controls all the levers. It controls food access, and it's opted to use its power, even on occasions, to shoot the people who are distributing the food.
This is just an absolute new low. Joining me now is Executive Council of Australian Jewry co-CEO Alex Ryvchin. Alex, thank you so much for joining me. What's your response to these comments?
Look, it's shameful, utterly despicable. And anyone who knows Bob Carr or has had the misfortune of sharing a conversation with Bob Carr knows that the only thing that Bob Carr cares about is Bob Carr. This is about him advancing his own agenda, giving effect to his deep contempt for members of the Jewish community, and particularly its leadership. This has little to do with solidarity with the Palestinian people. And the historical distortions, the false analogies he made there are truly despicable. He mentioned there Stalin's starvation of the Ukrainians. This was a famine man-made in the 1930s in which upwards of 6 million people died. He made comparisons to the Warsaw Ghetto, which is obviously one of the darkest chapters of the Holocaust. Now, to compare that to what is happening in Gaza, where Israel at every turn has sought to allow aid in by the truckload, where it has telegraphed every one of its moves, created humanitarian zones where people can seek shelter. This is a bloody and grinding war, there's no doubt, and people are suffering. There's no question about that. But this is a war that Israel did not choose. And this is a war that Hamas could end tomorrow if it accepted the ceasefire, which Israel has already accepted, or accepted a permanent end to the war. There is no comparison to be drawn with the most tyrannical regimes in history. But this is where we are today, where figures like this, former foreign ministers and premiers who still hold sway and respect in sections of the Labour Party, can say things like that. It's part of a huge disinformation campaign, and it results in increased anti-Semitism here at home. That's the only thing that it achieves.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think you're right. It was despicable, absolutely despicable. I want to ask you about the Prime Minister. He's really walking both sides of the street when it comes to this issue. He said he wouldn't recognise Palestine as a state at the UN in September in one breath, but on the other hand, continued to slam Israel. This is what he said.
It doesn't sound like you're about to do this in September or this year, but listening to the preconditions that you're laying out.
Look, what we will do is we'll make a decision based upon the time. Is the time right now? Are we about to imminently do that? No, we are not.
But at the General Assembly?
Are we about to do that? No, we are not. But we will engage constructively. Well, quite clearly, it is a breach of international law to stop food being delivered, which was a decision that Israel made in March. And
so it's breached international law?
Well, I'm not a lawyer. Those things will play out their course. But I tell you what it's a breach of. It's a breach of decent humanity and of morality.
Alex, it seems as though he's still leaving the door open to one day supporting a Palestinian statehood in the future.
Well, this is actually a positive development in the government's position. For a long time, they've spoken about a two-state solution and the aspiration of the Palestinians to statehood. They've stipulated that it has to be a peaceful, viable state alongside Israel and not in place of it, as many in the Palestinian movement aspire to. But the Prime Minister has also made clear, and the Foreign Minister also recently, that Hamas can play no future role in Gaza, that there can be no thought of recognising a Palestinian state while Hamas remains a fact of life and has effective control over that territory. At a press conference a couple of weeks ago, the Prime Minister also spoke about the rampant corruption, the nepotism, the ineptitude, the human rights abuses that occur in the West Bank, where the Palestinian Authority rules. These are the core issues. So when we talk about recognising a Palestinian state, it's not a symbolic gesture and then the facts come afterwards. This is a serious business that's being undertaken. And if someone were to recognise a Palestinian state now, as the French are purporting to do, it is the recognition of a fiction. It's the recognition of a failed state from the beginning. It's a recipe for more disaster. So the evolved position of the Australian government, where they talk about recognition at some point down the track, but when certain conditions are met, when there are institutions of statehood, when there is some semblance of democracy, and human rights in the territories that Palestinians aspire to control, then there can be a conversation about statehood.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess, as we know, that the hostages are still there. There's still hostages underground. So I just, it's extraordinary that we're even having to have this discussion. Alex, before we let you go, I just want to ask you about the pro-Palestinian protesters wanting to block the Sydney Harbour Bridge this weekend. The New South Wales Premier Chris Minns says he won't allow it. Are you confident he's going to be able to put his money where his mouth is on this?
Well, look, I think the Premier and the State of New South Wales and the police learned a very difficult lesson a few days after October 7, after the disgusting scenes on the steps of the Opera House, which shamed our country in the eyes of the world. And I think we're still reeling from that as a society. When we look at what happened in the intervening 21 months, the crisis of anti-Semitism, so much can be traced back to that event and the lax response to it. So with that in mind, I'm sure the Premier will hold firm. He's dealing with fanatics who may seek to march or protest unlawfully anyway, but this is a test for the police. Will they enforce the law and ensure that this state is a state of laws for all of us and not ruled by mobs and fanatics who seek to keep us off our national landmarks, who seek to paralyze the city on a weekend when people just want to get to their weekend sports and visit their family and friends? Is this the city for all of us or for the fanatical few? That's the question before us.
That is a very good point. What will the New South Wales Police do exactly? Alex Ryvchin, great to catch up as always. Thanks so much for joining me on the show this evening.